video. Okay. Can you see me now? You can see me now. Thank you very much. Thank you. If you have to ask any questions somewhere along the way, please kindly do so. I'll also be paying attention to the questions that you'll be asking, and I will humbly assist you. Welcome again, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Arnold. I'll be assisting you with Marketing 101. It's the most important module at IMM at the moment. Not because I'm tutoring it, but it's one of those that are very important. I also noticed when you were discussing before we started, some of you said you felt that this was very important. I'm hoping that I'm also going to spend the time, I'm going to make the time worth your while. I'm basically going to be discussing about key areas that you need to know as you prepare for your final examination. Also, I would look at what you should look at when you are studying. So I'm happy that you can all hear me. Like I said earlier on, my name is Arnold, and I will be assisting you through Marketing 101. And welcome. Your prescribed textbook, a very important one. I should also give you advice to those of you who dispose their textbook soon after writing. This is one of the most important textbooks that you should keep, as you are going to use it for Marketing 3. So don't throw away the textbook. Keep it and use it to prepare for Marketing 3. And also understand the theory, as it is very important. So keep your prescribed textbook, the one that you bought, that we are using. Your material generally is 10 units. The first 2 are divided into the first 2 chapters. So you should be familiar with. Now, for the purpose of this tutorial, although I'll go through some of the areas in chapter 1, but my presentation basically covers from chapters 6 right through to 10 to 12. I'm not saying the other areas are not being examined, but most of those areas were part of the assessment for the assignment. So I'll basically cover areas from chapters 6 to 10. But more important, I'll also be introducing you to some of the questions that you have. Now, the most important part of this tutorial is that I'll also go through with you some of the questions that have been examined before, so that you would have an idea in terms of how you approach questions as you write into the examination. I also need to warn you that this is just a basic marketing, it's introduction to marketing. So most of the questions require you to state, describe, list, and here and there they ask you to briefly describe. So you need to be very familiar with the meaning of those terms. So these are the 12 chapters that you are supposed to be familiar with. If you go to units, these are 10 units that you are supposed to be familiar with. Please make time to read the book back to back. When I'm saying back to back, go through each of the learning outcomes. For instance, you will notice at the beginning of each chapter or at the beginning of the learner guide, they introduce you to what are called learning outcomes, the areas that you are supposed to understand for each and every chapter. So you need to tick these elements for each and every chapter to make sure that you have understood all those elements if you want to pass the examination. So tick. I've just introduced these ones for chapter 1, but I will not be including them for the other material that I'm covering. But I'm assuming you understand that you need to tick all the learning outcomes to indicate that you have understood every one of them if you are preparing to pass. I also advise at least an hour a day that should be spent on studying marketing. And again, I advise you should read the material back to back. Understand every element that is covered in your textbook. I noticed the learner guide, there are some elements that it does not tell you to cover, but focus more on the learning outcomes. If they are not covered in your learner guide, which in some instance is very detailed, please try to make sure that all material that you are reading is from your prescribed textbook, and also make sure that you get most of the detail from your prescribed material. Now, for those of you who are writing for the first time, I don't believe in using the word FAIL. I prefer using the word relaunching as we are discussing marketing, because it's quite common that product may not do very well in the market. So I'm hoping that this advice that I will be giving you today will assist you to never relaunch the module. From where I am sitting, marketing is a very simple module. If you follow important principles, if you read through your material, you will find the subject very manageable. Right? The paper that you are going to write in May is a 3-hour paper, and it consists of 100 marks. What I need to advise you, for those of you who are writing for the first time, please kindly read the instructions that you are expected to know. Some of the instructions that you notice are there in front of you. Will this session be uploaded for us? Refer back to later. Yes, this session will be uploaded within 5 days. So you can expect to download the session in 5 days. Now, read the instruction clearly. Offhand, I will tell you that Section A is compulsory and is worth 50 marks. I will show you the structure of the Section A shortly. Section B is you answer 2 questions. Usually there are 4 questions. You are expected to choose any 2 questions. But I will show you the structure of those papers, and also I will try to explain. I think if you can't hear me, Charlene, it could be either your network, or check the speakers from your end. Can the others hear me? Just so that I'm sure that some of you can hear me. Yes. So Charlene, it must be something wrong with your mic. Thank you very much for confirming. Thank you very much. Yeah, she should just check your volumes. Thank you very much. So please kindly go through your instructions before you answer any question. But what is important, I also urge you to read the questions so that you understand exactly what is being examined. Much of this tutorial is aimed at looking at some of the questions that are examined. I have a couple of questions that I have included in this session. As we go through, I'll take a bit of time. Rian, not necessarily. Why I'm covering from 6 to 12 is because some of the chapters were covered during the first presentation, but you still need to go through the earlier chapters as well in detail. As I do the discussion here and there, I'll go back to those earlier chapters in the form of questions that have been asked before. So in one way or the other, I'll still cover some of the earlier chapters in the form of questions. So it's not necessarily 6 to 12. I also do not know what is covered in the examination. I'm just giving you guidelines. What is in the examination are the areas that are covered in your syllabus. That is, your learner guide indicates the areas that you are supposed to know in terms of preparing the exam. So the exam can come from any chapter from 1 to 12. But because it's only a 2-hour session, it's not possible for me to cover the entire syllabus. This is just more guidelines. If you follow the guidelines as you study any of the other chapters, you will still be able to succeed and pass very well. So it's not necessarily from 6 to 12, so that we are certain on that. It's still chapters 1 to 12 where you expect to find your examination. Although some sections that have already been assessed may not necessarily be examined. I'll also discuss on the basis of where you get multiple choice in terms of how you answer the multiple choice questions. I will discuss those areas as we go along. Section A, if it follows the structure that was there in October, Section A consists of basically 2 questions, 20 marks and 30 marks. The 20 marks comes from your multiple choice. For those of you who are studying just out of interest, what are the answers for those 2 questions? Just out of interest so that you also participate. Someone says D. Someone says promotion. Alesha, don't write promotion. Give us symbols next time. Promotions, promotions, promotions. Thank you very much for that correct answer. What about number 2? Number 2. Which one of the following is a benefit of strong customer satisfaction? Lower acquisition cost, sourcing supplying information, capturing of value, lower prices. Everyone seems to be saying A. Which one of the following is the benefit of strong customer satisfaction? Some are saying E, lower prices, increasing benefits, lower acquisition costs, sourcing of supplying information. So which one is the answer? Everyone seems to be giving a different answer. Which one of the following is a benefit of stronger customer satisfaction? A. Do we have to vote for the answer? I will support those who are saying A. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Just to notice if you are participating. We also go to a section. I also want you to notice how you approach questions on. I take it some of you have your prescribed textbook in front of you. You might not have covered up to chapter 11 or chapter 12, but what I'm looking at right now is a multiple choice question. I'm basically going to look at 1.19. If you have read through, when marketers advertise a product, it is not supported by evidence. They are using which false advertising technique? There is ambiguity, concealment, exaggeration, lying, and psychological appeal. Now, one thing that I would want you to notice is that if you look through the textbook, the answer is very clear. Of course, from a layman's perspective, someone who has not gone through the subject of marketing, they might consider lying as an option. But go to page 288 for those of you with textbooks. For those of you with textbooks, go to page 288 and read through what ambiguity means, concealment of facts means, and exaggeration. Page 288. If you are there, I just want to demonstrate in terms of there is only one correct answer as far as a multiple choice is concerned. But why I like you to understand multiple choice is that it helps you to study throughout the material in the subject, in the syllabus. And also one important aspect is that multiple choice helps you to also prepare for the other elements. Each chapter on average is going to have at least 2 multiple choice questions, and they are out of 20. Thank you very much. I notice everyone is picking the correct answer. That's the process that you have to go through. It's not about guessing answers, because if you guess answers, you are likely to fail, because some of the answers are quite correct. So in section A, you have basically 2 questions. 2 questions. First question, which is multiple choice out of 20 marks. And then you have the second question, which is 30 marks. And these are short answer questions. Again, I've extracted from the previous semester's question paper so that you can see the structure of the paper that you are going to be writing in May. It's structured like this. What I want to emphasize as well is that these are compulsory questions. When they are compulsory questions, it means you are not choosing any. You need to write them all questions. So just to go through, just an indicator in terms of where the questions are coming from. Amelia, I'm sure the connection is terrible from your end. But what you should do, if you are unable, you can simply try to follow us. At some point, I would want you to be able to download within a week. It will be uploaded. Now, notice the questions are not coming from a particular chapter. They come from different sections within your syllabus. The first question relates to the product area. The second question relates to distribution area, which is P place. And also the third question relates to, this is media schedule, promotion area. And the third question refers to chapter 10. So you need to be able to read through all chapters so that you understand. And the last one relates to the last chapter within your syllabus. So there is no particular chapter where questions are coming from, but they come from any point within your textbook. So you need to be very familiar. For those of you who are preparing, be familiar with all the sections that are covered within your syllabus. All the areas that are indicated that you should know, you need to cover them. So as we go through, please familiarize yourself. I've just indicated this is from chapter 6, this is from chapter 7, this is from chapter, I think 9, this is from chapter 10, this is from chapter 12. So it means the questions are balanced throughout the entire syllabus. So these are typically some of the questions that you get. The paper that I'm displaying in front of you is from the most recent paper, the paper that was written in October. It seems there are many of you who can't follow, but the others have confirmed that the network is good. Just try and sort from your end, because I'm sure most of the guys can hear me. Yes, this paper is from October 2016, but I do have several other papers from earlier that I'm going to be displaying as I discuss with you, so that you see typically how the questions are asked, right? You notice, just so that you understand clearly how you are supposed to answer the question. Please repeat the chapters as I'll repeat them as I go along. This is chapter 6, chapter 7, this is chapter 9, promotion, this is chapter 12, this is chapter 10, and this is chapter 12. So don't cram the chapters, because the exam these days comes as a very balanced examination. So that's section A for you. 50 marks all in all questions are compulsory. When we say compulsory, it means you need to answer all the questions. One other advice, make sure that you don't leave gaps. Another thing that I have seen most students make mistakes is, this question is 2.1, and don't introduce additional numbering when you are answering the question. Like for instance, you say question 2.21 when you want to introduce an important point from your perspective. Make sure the question that just indicate question 2.1 rather than 2.21. Be very clear on that. When it's question 2.2, just indicate question 2.2. Don't say when you are introducing a point question 2.2.1. Just use the numbering that is given to you by the examiner. Then section B. Section B, you answer any 2 questions. Sometimes there are 4, sometimes there are 3. But what you need to look at is the instructions. So as you prepare, choose the questions that have marks that you are able to, that the questions that you understand and the questions that you are able to answer. Now, if I'm also analyzing, this is also from chapter 6, the various benefits of having related products in a product line. You get this from chapter 6. You also have, there are a number of factors that an organization have an influence in price determination. This is chapter 8, the one that deals with pricing. I'm going to be discussing some of those as we discuss. The advantages of and disadvantages of using magazines. You get this in chapter 9, the chapter that deals with promotion. MIS, this can either be found in chapter 4, or you can also find it in chapter 11, the chapter that integrates all the material. So you will notice that there is no specific chapter that you would say the questions are coming from. Although, based on this paper, you are safe to conclude that there are more questions that are coming from the product area. So if you are going to go into the examination, chapters 6 to 10 are core in terms of understanding. What is covered in those chapters? Those are the elements of the marketing mix, a product in chapter 6. But I will be discussing those areas in detail. What I'm simply highlighting at the moment is to introduce you to the common areas and in terms of how the questions are structured in an examination that you are writing, particularly for those of you who are writing for the first time. You also look at chapter 1. For obvious reasons, I'm also going to introduce material from chapter 1. I know from previously I discussed chapter 1, but this is a typical examination question that you get in your own words and in a maximum of 6 lines. Give your definition of marketing. Now, by now, because you are students that are studying marketing, you probably have your own definition. Last time when I did the presentation, I introduced you to a definition that I feel is very easy to remember and easy to understand. This definition is by Kotler. Of course, if you can remember the definition from your prescribed textbook, it's also good because it's simple. It just says organization create value for customers. It's a process in the form of good ideas, goods and services to facilitate satisfying exchange relationship. This definition is adopted from American Marketers Association. Now, there is another way that I can assist you to remember how to define marketing. It's a process, according to Kotler, a process of creating, communicating, and delivering value to a target market at a profit. If you want to create an acronym, it simply means CCDVTP. Now, why I like that definition is that it's very simple to remember, because all marketing, even if you look at the top definition, they are also talking about creating. They also talk of communicating, and they also talk of the elements of delivering value. And all these elements that we discuss in this definition are the ones that encompass the study of marketing. So as we study through, you are going to realize that we discuss in terms of how companies create and how they communicate about products that they introduce into the market, and they are supposed to do that at a profit. So this is one area. Chapter 1 is very important, but the answer in blue won't get 5 marks. The answer in blue will definitely get you 5 marks, because what you need to know, there are key elements that are in the definition. You get a mark for saying an organization creates value for customers in the form of ideas, services to facilitate, because these are the key areas of the definition. So the moment you indicate key areas in that definition, you get marks for identifying. So you get full marks for being able to define marketing the way it's created, because those are the key terms. You can add to the key terms, but those are the ones that give you the 5 marks. So you get 5 marks from the definitions that you get above. We also look at some other elements that you are supposed to be familiar with from chapter 1. If you look at some of the components, this is a question that was asked, I think, in 2014, where you are simply expected to list the components of a typical marketing plan. You find these in chapter 1. So you are supposed to know the components of a marketing plan. At this level, you are not expected to write in detail about what is there in a marketing plan. But as you go further, you will be expected to explain. So you can write briefly in terms of what is in blue will give you 5 marks. So if you are asked to list the components of a typical marketing plan, you notice the marketing plan that you are given at level 1, these are the key headings. Executive summary. In your executive summary, it simply has what is in the past, what is the past, the present, and the future. Those are the key areas that you find in an executive summary. The current marketing situation, which we normally call situation analysis, consists of PESTIL, which is, or in simple, PEST, political, economic, and social, and the relevant marketing mix. You also look at opportunities and issues. That helps you to create your SWOT. So these are the areas that you should be familiar with. At your level, you need to be able to list the components of a typical marketing plan. When you list the components of a typical plan, you also need to briefly describe what is contained in each. My advice is at most 3 lines. Don't go beyond that. Another thing that students who are writing for the first time should be very alert is in terms of mark allocation. The basic guideline that I give you as you prepare for the exam is that for 2 marks, at most 4 lines. In other words, you are never supposed to go beyond 4 lines when you are getting 2 marks. For 5 marks, it's at most 10 lines. In some instances, you can get 5 marks by just writing 5 lines. So be very careful. Don't write too much when you are answering questions. So notice most of the common questions just want you to list, briefly describe. Being brief means a brief answer. Don't write too much as you answer the question. So typical components of a marketing plan, you need to be familiar with those. I also look at one of the areas that are covered. I've introduced a diagram that is slightly more detailed than the one that you have in your material. Write short notes 6 to 8 to show your understanding of each of the following concepts. The concept called market penetration, you will again find a diagram that is in chapter 1. When we talk about market penetration, we are saying this is what we are also referring here as to growth in existing market, but the common terminology is market penetration. So where it says growth in existing product market, it's also market penetration. Basically, the strategy entails selling your present products in your present market. So market penetration generally means you can increase market share either by promoting heavily so that consumers can buy more, or having low margins. Or the common strategy that is there is buy one and get two. Or those are the strategies that are used in market penetration. You also look at what is called this one, growth through product development. This we also call it product development. In your book, it's referred to as product development. So it's when you introduce new products or modified products or line extension. A diversification, which is written here, growth through diversification. Diversification basically means new products in new markets. In other words, for instance, it could be ABSA going into car manufacturing. We call that unrelated. Or if it's related, it's ABSA maybe forming an insurance company. So you need to be familiar with strategies that are here, market penetration and diversification. Just offhand, there's another strategy called price penetration. Don't confuse between the two. This market penetration is used for growth purposes. So don't confuse between market penetration and price penetration. I'm just warning you in advance. I'm obviously going to discuss about price penetration at some point, but you need to be familiar with that. So I'm just highlighting some of the few areas that you are possibly going to find in the examination that come from the first chapter. Another important area, I'm not going to discuss much, but look at what is corporate social investment. It's different from what we refer to as corporate social investment. It's also another very popular examination question. So the other element, in order to show your understanding, you need to always give practical examples. In terms of our corporate social investment, we are basically talking about companies that have invested a lot in the community in which they are in. So give examples of companies like Vodacom, Nedbank, that have done enough in terms of corporate social investment. In other words, you are investing within the society in which you get your business from. Another important term that you also should be familiar with is the term that relates to ethics. But I'm going to discuss on ethics at some point in terms of the 4 Ps. Right. I go back again to introduce you to a number of questions before I start discussing the theory that you are supposed to know from the chapters that I've indicated earlier on. I'll be a bit slow in terms of displaying the questions so that you may also be able to see the questions as we discuss. But I will be telling you where to find certain questions as I discuss through. So I'm going through a number of questions. The way I have structured this revision exercise is I go through a number of question 2s, and I also go through a number of question 3s. Unfortunately, Rafilo, once I pass through a presentation, I'm not going to come back. The reason why I do that is because you are meant to, you will be able to view that area again. So I will not go back to a presentation. I'll just go forward because they are being recorded. And we'll probably pass through the same question again. This is October, question 2 of October 2015. I just want you to look at how the questions are structured. so that you are familiar. These are typical question 2 questions. Look at this particular one. Discuss the 5 stages of the product life cycle. Include an example of product in each stage to support your answer. I just wanted to correct something for some of you that are listening. If you go to chapter 6, towards the end where they discuss about the product life cycle, you will notice there are 2 concepts that are there. There is the industry life cycle, which is by Porter. That's the one with 5 stages. I think this is an error. It's supposed to be industry life cycle because the industry life cycle has 5 stages. And the product life cycle, that's the traditional product life cycle, has 4 stages. But if ever they are asking you a question that is 5 stages, they are basically referring to the one by Porter, which is the industry life cycle. I'm going to discuss about those concepts as I go on in order to demonstrate in terms of how you are supposed to apply. So this you find from chapter 6. Also, question 2, briefly discuss why organizations should add value to their products. This question needs no introduction. If I remember very well, it was one of the questions that was on your assignment, and you get that question throughout the entire textbook, but mostly from chapter 1. Now, the other way, they say draw or illustrate. It means the 3 different distribution channels used to deliver the product to the final consumer. When they are asking you to draw, it's for 5 marks. So they want 3 diagrams. If you go to chapter on distribution, which I believe is chapter 7, you will notice that the diagram, I'll try and describe it from here. The first diagram would show you the manufacturer directly to customer. That's the first diagram. The second one would show you manufacturer, then there's an intermediary in between, usually the retailer, then to the final consumer. That's the second one. Then the third one, it probably shows the manufacturer, the wholesaler, the retailer, and the customer. So those are typically, and you get the diagrams. So if the examiner tells you to draw, it means there is no explanation that is required there. Then you also go to 2.4. Briefly discuss the 4 competition-based pricing methods: price skimming, penetration pricing, customary pricing, above, at, or below competitors. Now, this is an interesting question because they have told you. What you should also expect in the examination, sometimes they do not tell you, they just say, briefly discuss the 4 competition-based pricing methods. In this case, you are actually fortunate because they are asking you, right? Price skimming is a strategy that is commonly used by companies that are introducing innovations. And you get this concept in chapter that deals with pricing. So price skimming, common for those companies that are introducing innovation. The reason why they do that is because they want to get as much cash as possible before other competitors come in. So if you notice at the moment, the companies that are selling the 4K televisions are selling them at a high price. The reason why they are doing that is because they want to get as much cash before other competitors come in. Then pricing penetration, remember earlier on, when I introduced the concept of market penetration, I explained that this concept is on pricing. It's a price that is low at launch, that is gradually increased in order you use that pricing strategy to attract customers to buy you. This strategy was used by Ariel, the washing powder. I'm sure I remember very well, they were charging at 38 Rand something for 2 kg. And at the time, Omo, their chief competitor, was charging at about 62 Rand. A customary pricing relates to products that are priced, 30, yes, you are right. The customary pricing, you generally understand that these products are priced at this price. Like for instance, I hope you know this, like matches. Everyone understands that matches has to be maybe 5 Rand or 10 Rand. So if you price anything above that, consumers are bound to resist. Also, maybe soft drinks are supposed to be sold 10 Rand in a vending machine. So if you sell yours at a higher price than that, you are likely to lose. Then above at or below competitors' pricing. A very common strategy. Burger King priced their product slightly above KFC, rather McDonald's when they entered the market. There are times when you just match the competitor price or you price below the competitors. So I will also discuss at some point when I go to chapter 6. But what I want you to view is to notice typical questions that are common. So far you have noticed that most of the questions are centered on understanding the 4 Ps. Also, discuss why an organization should communicate with its customers. As part of your answer, discuss the 4 factors that an organization should consider when selecting its communication mix. This relates to integrated marketing communication. Again, I'm going to discuss those elements when I get there. The other question, number 2, May 2015. Notice this relates to product. I'm going to discuss about product. This concept of repositioning, I'm not going to discuss about it today, but I'm sure you know how to define it. When I ask students at first year to define the concept of positioning, they start telling me about where you find the product in the shelf. No, that's not positioning. Positioning is creating an image in the minds of the customer. Now, that image can be so lasting. For instance, if we are talking about motor vehicles, safety is a position that is held by Volvo because they've done that over the years. Now, to reposition a product means changing that perception and creating a new one. If you want to learn more in terms of how repositioning works, you can refer to the just go through and understand what happened to the product Lifebuoy, which is now very acceptable at the moment. So this question, you find it in chapter 5 that deals with segmentation, STP in chapter 5. Then organizations need to decide how many intermediaries are going to be involved. There are 3 types of distribution alternatives available in making the decision. Again, I'll probably discuss about this concept. Intensive distribution, selective distribution. Aisha, you say, if we answer the question using EG to give a better description of our understanding, will it be marked correctly? Yes. You are supposed to give examples, but indicate, don't say EG, please. Write in full, for example. Don't say EG in an example or ETC. Avoid using shortened version when you write an exam. If you are indicating an example, I prefer that you say example, you underline, and then you indicate that particular example. I hope that is clear. And also, this question is coming from the distribution area, chapter 7. Intensive distribution, selective distribution, and exclusive distribution. Also, this question is also coming again. Differentiate between the terms price skimming and price penetration. These concepts are different. I have already indicated earlier on the distinction between price skimming and price penetration. But what you will notice, this is one of the popular questions that you will discover. Also, 2.5, the level of service provided by customer determines his level of satisfaction. Discuss the 4 service level. I'm going to discuss about those. You get that in chapter 10. The 4 service level are also similar to the one that I discussed for a product. So be familiar with that. The other question, 2.6, briefly discuss how marketing research can be conducted using the internet, chapter 11. So as you follow through the trends in revising, what I would want you to do as you revise, I'm not saying use past papers. Read through the material thoroughly for each chapter. Go and look at the common questions that are asked for each particular chapter. One thing that I have also observed is that examiners are asking from any part of the syllabus. So be familiar with your learning outcomes to be clear. Lisego says we don't have the May. That's why I have introduced it. I have only introduced papers that you don't have so that I give you a broader perspective in terms of examination. I know you have the October 2015, you have the 2 papers for 2016. I'm giving you additional papers for you to see a broader perspective so that you can understand. So I'm supposed to see you smiling to say we have an extra paper. So I'm just giving you additional papers in terms of that. I even go to as far as 2014. So it's just showing you trends in terms of how the examiner structures their question. This is October 2014. Typically, they look at the textbook says that there are many ways of defining marketing. In a maximum of 6 lines, give what you feel should be an adequate definition of marketing. Okay, Tom, Deb, yes, you can, but I'm highly ethical. I probably will know what is in there, but I will not tell you. But that's an interesting one. I'm trying to assist you to be able to pass without seeing the paper right now. So you will probably pass by just following some of the instructions that I'm giving you right now. So this question was basically looking at ways in which you can define marketing. So answer all 3 sections in not more than 6 lines using an example. Illustrate your answer. Explain what is the marketing objective. If you go to chapter 1, you will be able to see what an objective is. Like right now, I'm so sure all of you have set objectives to pass. But by going through this, you are probably going to be able to get a distinction, because passing is not enough. Set an objective to get a distinction. By the way, our distinction is from 75%. So it's very easy to get 75%. You will have reduced they give you 100%, and it's easy to get that distinction, but you have to spend at least an hour a day reading through the material. It's 70%, not 75%, not 70. It's 75. So you also look at this question, summarize precisely. They also want you to know what is marketing strategy. The simple definition of marketing strategy is your STP plus your 4 Ps. But you need to be able to describe what that is. That's what we call marketing strategy. Precisely summarize the significant difference between things mentioned in 2.2.1, an objective and a strategy. An objective is what you want to achieve. A strategy is how you achieve that objective. So that's the subtle difference between those. So you need to be able to look at marketing strategy can be used as a guide of the whole organization. If you agree with this statement, explain exactly if it is possible in terms of how this happens. Now, you said STP, STP plus marketing mix. In other words, you are supposed to discuss in terms of how strategy works. It helps you to identify your segments. It helps you to clearly identify those segments. It also helps you to properly target those markets that you are serving. It also assists you in terms of targeting the right segments and also to position your product appropriately within the market that you choose. And you also communicate that through the marketing mix. So the areas that you are supposed to be able to explain briefly in terms of how does the 4 Ps communicate your strategy. For instance, if I mention the product Rolls-Royce, most of you will probably think of the wealthy. But what that simply means is that the Rolls-Royce is aimed at a particular segment of the market. And if I also mention a product like a City Golf, something also comes into your mind. So these are the typical questions that you are supposed to be familiar. I've gone way back to as far as 2014 in May. So this is another question that you are also expecting to get in a question. Typically, they are saying marketing is important. It doesn't really matter the typical question that you are given, but you need to know why marketing is important generally to an organization of your choice. But the scenario that they've given you is motor industry or FMCG sectors. So what you are basically supposed to do is to generally explain marketing is important for the motor industry because of ABCD. Generally, they are asking you about the advantages of marketing and show why marketing is important to your chosen organization for 7 marks. So you need to come up with at least 5 points and examples as to why marketing is important to your own organization. Question 2.2 is typically a very interesting question. Identify how marketing assists the following functions within your chosen organization to perform their tasks effectively in context of the marketing concept. Reading through the concept of the marketing concept, you discover that all functional areas should work together. So the role of marketing in the marketing concept is to communicate with consumers and relay that information to the other functional areas within the organization. The role of finance is to acquire funding for any particular product, for any requirements within the organization in order to satisfy customer needs. So their role is to source the finances that are required. Then production, they produce the need-satisfying products efficiently and effectively. So whatever products that are there, they also need to tell marketing that they are capable of producing those products. Then distribution, although ideally distribution is an element of marketing, but the role of distribution generally relates to having the product at the right place, at the right time, as and when the customer wants it. So you need to be able to actually link the relationship in terms of how marketing is able to do that. So I'm just looking at, yes, there's a slight difference between the book. So some questions I will also indicate where it's different. So I'll be able to explain. But in terms of how the questions are asked, there are some similarities here and there. Like in your own words, define marketing concept. Now you will notice for those of you that are using that have the old books, you will see that there's a difference in terms of how we define the marketing concept. So refer to the current book. They don't discuss finance in detail, but when we talk about the marketing concept, they discuss about how other functional areas within the organization interact together in the marketing concept. So you just have to derive in terms of how finance assists in terms of achieving. Remember, total organizational integration. These are the functional areas that you find within the organization. All these sections, you find them in chapter 1. But you need to understand marketing concept is found in chapter 1 of your learning material. So I will not go further into detail in terms of, there are some questions that are no longer relevant because of the changes of the book. But what I want you to understand is how questions are structured and what approach you have to take in terms of what answering the questions. Also, a very common question, discuss the 5 product levels as identified by Kotler, chapter 6 of your book. Differentiate the terms between disintermediation and reintermediation. You find that in chapter 7 that deals with distribution. Briefly discuss the 3 pricing objectives available to an organization. A chapter on pricing, I think it's chapter 8. They are important for you to know. Right, notice something here. Briefly discuss, and you are getting only 3 marks. At most, you write only 2 lines per each element. But it's also possible for you to get the full marks by just writing 1 line in terms of those objectives. So be able to do that. There's a different types of advertising a company product at each stage. Now, I will discuss this concept when I go to chapter 6, when I will be describing the stages of the product life cycle. This one, my screen is also bad, but it is asking about discuss the 4 types of advertising that are done at each level. Sorry about that. I can also notice from here that my screen is cutting. So the question says there are different types of advertising that can be used by a marketing company. The product stage in the product life cycle, the product stage in the product life cycle will influence the specific type of advertising that will be used. Discuss any 4 types of advertising and explain which one is appropriate at each stage of the product life cycle. So it's not only for you, even here, it's like that. So I apologize for that. Another question, now question 3s. These questions, you get them from section B of the syllabus. So I'm generally not going to discuss them in detail, but what you need to see are similarities. I have gone back to 2015. This question, we've just discussed it now. differentiate the terms between disintermediation and reintermediation. No, I've repeated the question, sorry, it's the same question. Then May 2015, the 5 stages, right? Notice what I was discussing with you earlier on. If you go to chapter 6, they say discuss Porter's 5 stages of the product life cycle, also known as the PLC. Include an example of a product at each stage to support your answer. So 10 marks. Generally speaking, this question is supposed to say the industry life cycle because it talks about the industry as a whole. So notice if you go to the chapter that we discuss a Porter's 5-stage model, it refers in your material as industry life cycle, not product life cycle. I'm sure the next time this question is given, it will indicate the industry life cycle because the product life cycle is 4 stages. So these things, you get them in chapter 6. The product life cycle is in chapter 6. Explain channel conflict may occur between intermediaries. I'm going to address that question as we discuss, but it's chapter 7. Differentiate between a push and a pull strategy, chapter 9. We will discuss that when we discuss promotion. Discuss the term personal selling. This is also relates to promotion. And also, there are different types of interactions that are involved between a client and a service provider. Discuss the 3 types of interaction. This is in chapter 10 where we discuss about services. There's a triangle, interaction between the company, interaction between the customer, and interaction between the employee. Although it's only 3 marks, when it's 3 marks, make sure you don't write a lot. Monica says, can you just explain a bit on industry shakeout? Industry shakeout is that stage where there are so many players and some companies cannot compete effectively at that level. So other companies are forced to either move out into that industry so that the companies that are stronger can survive. There's lots of price competition at that stage. So it forces other companies to shake out. That's what we call industry shakeout. So it's industry life cycle, not product life cycle. So in industry, there are companies that have moved out. Like right now, you notice in the mobile sector, there are some companies that no longer have products that are operating. It's because they can no longer compete effectively. I know Nokia is coming back, but it's one of those companies that have also been forced to go out of the industry. Sheldon, I don't know what you are referring to as Virgin, but do you mean Virgin the mobile or Virgin the group? Sheldon says yes, or mobile. But they are still competing, Virgin Mobile, because they piggyback on Cell C. Discuss the importance of physical environment. You will see this section when we discuss chapter 10, and it's also covered in chapter 11. So now I'll just go through some of the questions so that you see similarities in terms of how they are asked. This is May 2015. Again, this looks like it's a repeat. This is also October 2014. Identify and briefly explain each of the 4 stages encountered in a typical product life cycle. So right now, you should actually know that you don't go to the examination without thorough knowledge of the concept of the product life cycle. Using example to illustrate your answer, show how the focus of the promotional activities can be adjusted through the stages of a typical product life cycle. Identical questions, similar from almost the same chapter. Promotion changes, but I will explain again. In fact, maybe I can just explain now so that I'll remind you as we go there. Typically, when you introduce the product at introductory stage, you use what is called a pioneering advertising, because you have to introduce the product into the market. The consumers don't know about the product. So you have to educate. You are informing the consumers about the existence of a product. As you go into growth, other players enter the market. So what you are basically doing is now to do competitive advertising. You are now emphasizing on buy my product. So you are doing competitive advertising. Now I think you can see the theory. As you go on through the product life cycle, you will be able to look at that. Questions are also found in the good answer booklet, even though I see you are over explaining that. Arnold wonder about. Okay. Refill. Okay. Briefly explain how focus groups could be used in the research process. Now, this is in chapter 4. The research process, you did a lot during the assignment on the research process, but I'm not saying don't look at it again, because there's a possibility that the examiner can repeat the question again. This is not the focus of today's study, but please go through areas in terms of other elements that you find in the research process, in terms of you need to be able to define secondary data, primary data. You also need to be able to define qualitative research and quantitative research. You need to be familiar with some of those terms. What is a focus group? You need to know that. What is surveys? You need to have an idea of what that is. It's covered in chapter 4. Right, the questions again, explain the new product development process. You get this one in chapter 6. This is distribution, intensive distribution, the one we use for recharge cards. Physical distribution, which is the physical movement of a product from point A to point B. Also, cost plus pricing strategy is a pricing strategy where you calculate all the costs and you add a markup depending on the company, the organizational policy. So cost plus entailing adding all the costs and just adding an amount to that price. So typically, I'll just rush through some of the questions. You will see these are typical question 4. What you will notice is that the questions are almost identical, but they cover all the areas, particularly areas on the marketing mix. So advice as we go on, do not go to the exam without thorough knowledge of the strategies that are used in the marketing mix. So do not go to the exam without knowing the strategies. This is chapter 6. This is chapter 8 on pricing. This is chapter 6 on chapter 9 on promotion. This one is chapter 10 on services. So you will notice you don't necessarily have to concentrate on particular chapters. Right now you still have ample time for you to actually go through the key chapters. If someone is now saying 6 to 10 are the core, but not the entire. Thanks, Alesh. Yes, you need to know the entire syllabus. It's not only 6 to 10, but I'm covering 6 to 12. There are questions that are very popular that come from chapter 11. I will be discussing those as we go along. So, look at that. Right, those are typical question 4s. Question 4, vertical integration, that's chapter 7. Discuss 2 direct marketing methods, chapter 9. Explain why marketers should ensure that their communication is ethical. Again, you look at chapter 9, and in chapter 11 we also discuss about areas of ethical communication. Also discuss the 5 categories that explain the degree of tangibility. This relates to services. Include an example for each. So if they say include an example for each element, make sure you indicate example, so that the examiner is clear that this is the example that you are indicating. Discuss the importance of people in the extended marketing mix for services. The additional 3 P's, you know them: people, processes, and physical evidence. You should also be familiar, covered in chapter 10. So in chapter 10, they will tell you how important people are. So I will be discussing that as well. This was relatively easier in 2014. You need to define what you understand by the term consumer value. It was there in your assignment. The economic environment. Please notice, we are only referring to the economic environment, not the overall macro environment. Take note of that. Product positioning. I've discussed the concept of product positioning earlier. Consumerism, you get this in chapter 1. This force of consumers that are forcing companies to do what they want in terms of their combined effort. It's common in Europe, especially in terms of those companies that are causing a negative impact to the environment. They can act together as consumers and boycott some of those companies' products. Then a penetration pricing policy. You remember we have gone through penetration pricing policy. If you are following these trends, you can actually notice that penetration pricing policy or pricing policy, this is one of the most common pricing policy that you need not go to the exam without thorough knowledge. Again, this is May 2014. What is market penetration? I discussed market penetration earlier on. Brand revival, it's done when a product is almost into decline. You want to relaunch. Again, I advise you to look at a product like Lifebuoy. That is now a new lease of life. It has gone through brand revival. It's when the brand is going down and you introduce strategies that entails changing the overall marketing mix in order to introduce a new product. Target market, I'm sure you are all familiar with the target market. Advertising, which is one of the most prominent area of promotion. Any paid presentation by an identified sponsor. That's what we call advertising. So you need to be very familiar with advertising. What forms of advertising for 5 marks? Also sales promotion. I'm going to discuss about those elements shortly, so no need for me to discuss them in detail now. Also, question 5's distribution management, chapter 7. So they are saying alternative available to an organization, a number of intermediaries. As part of your answer, include an example in each alternative. The intensity, this is selective, exclusive, and intensive. You need to be able to give an example. Intensive distribution, we are talking about the recharge card. Selective distribution, we are talking about some vehicles. Then exclusive distribution, these are specialized products. It could be vehicles. So if we are saying extensive, if you want to abuse cars, you could say those cars that you find being sold at any point, they are extensively distributed. Although no one really does intensive distribution when they are selling cars. They all do selective distribution. But with most consumables, the consumables are intensively distributed. Yes, Coca-Cola is intensive distribution. Then maybe we would say product, if you are going to beverages, we can say Snapple is selectively distributed. Then you would find other products that are exclusively distributed, like those expensive whiskies. You only find them in selected distributed outlet. Then after the list price, a product has been determined. Discuss what you understand by the term allowances, discounts, geographical adjustments that can be made. This is chapter 8 on pricing. Towards step number 8, that's when we discuss when you are about to create the final price. I'm sure you know allowances, these are discounts that are given to retailers. Discounts, it's also a reduction in the price. Geographical adjustments, if you are in the coastal areas, petrol is much cheaper, fuel is cheaper. As you go in, it's more expensive. It depends on that geographical adjustment. You also look at this question, ethics into consideration when using the internet. This is the second time I'm seeing this question. Explain how the following terms relate to another by explaining how they relate to the service triangle. If you also remember, we have seen this question. That's that triangle. In external marketing, it's between the company and the customer. Interactive marketing, it's also, I think, between the company. You look at this, we'll discuss it shortly as we discuss chapter 10, where we discuss services. Internal marketing, this is between the employee and the company. This interactive marketing is between the employee and the customer. So they are saying briefly discuss this for 3 marks. 5.5, discuss the importance of physical evidence. This is the second time we are seeing it can be physical evidence, it can be processes. So do not go to the exam without knowing the additional marketing mix variable. We also look at 5.6. When monitoring the marketing environment, we are aware that we are in an information age, something which requires fundamental strategic response from management. Explain the key drivers. This is chapter 11. So what I was trying to demonstrate is familiarity in terms of the areas that you are supposed to be familiar with. Do not go and just study certain areas of the book. but familiarize yourself with the entire syllabus. But you should know what is asked by the examiner and don't rush to answer the question before you understand. So those are typically some of the common questions. And I think by now we are just repeating some of the questions that we have already seen. Search engine marketing, that's a new question. You find it in chapter 11 that deals with chapter 12 that deals with the internet. So don't skip any chapter. All chapters are equally important because they are part of the syllabus. Especially, I actually favor the last chapters. This one, you find it in chapter 11. This is chapter 12. This is also chapter 10. So they try to balance through. You remember, we have also seen this cost plus pricing, experience effect. I'm going to discuss about those concepts shortly. So typically, I've gone through some of the most common questions that you are supposed to be familiar with. I've even broadened so that your understanding revolves around mastering questions that are common. Not only that, but also understand how the examiner wants. For each question, please give an example to show your understanding and indicate clearly that example so that the examiner is sure that you are giving an example. Those are some of the questions that were there. Market segmentation. Don't go to the exam without knowing market segmentation. I know it was covered during the assignment, but please be familiar with the concept of market segmentation. Also, the consumer decision-making process, we discussed that during the assignment. So you can refer back to that tutorial on the assignment because it highlighted those key areas that you are supposed to know. Segmentation, important area. You will notice it comes so often. So go into the exam with thorough knowledge of the principle of STP. 4 elements, and write the concept of the product concept. Also a popular question, that's chapter 6, at the beginning of chapter 6. So be familiar with that. Yes, chapter 5, very important. Remember, I've also told you that when it comes to multiple choice, there are at least 2 questions from each chapter. So in order for you to answer multiple choice very well, you also need to familiarize yourself with multiple the textbook content. So understand almost every chapter. It's very important for you to do that. So ideally, I've gone through most of the common questions. I've also shown you broadly in terms of the structure of the questions. So by now you should actually be familiar with what you are expected to know. Now I'm going into discussing some of the theory. I might not discuss it in great depth, but what I want you to understand are some of the common areas in terms of the areas that you are supposed to be familiar with as we discuss through. So the first chapter that I'm discussing is the concept of product. So I'll go through areas that I have mentioned before. I'll just highlight as we go on. Right. Remember earlier on, we were discussing about the product concept. It's very important. So the product is one of the elements of the marketing mix. This is the first one that we are discussing. It's very important. Remember, there are 4 important marketing mix variables: price, product, promotion, and place. You need to be very familiar with those. So in this instance, you also need to understand what is involved in a product. We have the core product, what the customer is actually purchasing. We have the tangible product. If you go to that diagram on page on chapter 6, it's at the beginning of the chapter, you will see the tangible product, which will include elements to do with packaging, because it's important. That constitutes the tangible product. You also look at the augmented, other supporting act, like your warranties, your guarantees. This potential element looks at what customers really expect. So I urge you to read through in order to understand the product concept. It's very important. The same content for services is also equally important. So you also need to familiarize yourself with that. Another area that you need to look at is in terms of value. Although this concept is covered very well in chapter 1 in terms of what constitutes value. Value constitutes an area where the benefits far exceed the cost. And how do you do that? You should aim to increase these benefits at the same time reducing the costs. companies these days, I'm sure you appreciate, the phones that we used to have are now more powerful than the ones we had 5 years ago. We are seeing more value. Of course, the prices are here and they're also going up. But generally speaking, companies have been working on increasing product value on consumers. So please familiarize yourself with these concepts. They are better. Someone is talking about the 3310. It's coming back. I miss Snake. So most of us will be playing Snake again very soon if Nokia 3310 is reintroduced. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that game. We also look at important concepts that you need to know in terms of the product. We look at durability, tangibility, the buyer type, in other words, benefits versus price, and tangibility. But in that context, the common question, this is supposed to be under services, but this is what distinguishes a product from a physical, from a service. A physical product from a service. Now, look at it. A service is intangible in that you can't touch it. A service, you can't separate the service provider from the service. That's why we say it's inseparable. Then heterogeneous. We are talking about consistency in terms of service. If I can explain this better, we are referring to a situation where if you go to the same bank but different branches, they are most likely not offering the same service. So it's because of heterogeneity. Despite training, what companies aim to do is to give you consistent service. Or sometimes, again, the same person who served you in the morning, if you go back in the evening, the person is probably tired. They might give you the same service. Then in terms of perishability, this is a concept that is very difficult to actually understand. But we are saying, as an example, once we have done this tutorial and the time is done, you will not be able to experience this time again as a basis of service. You will notice the difference. If you are here, you are able to ask me questions. But those of you who are away, they will only be able to watch the video, but they will not have a chance of asking questions because that time would have been done. So services are highly perishable. Another area that you need to be very familiar with is the classification of products. You look at convenience products, shopping goods, specialty goods, and unsought goods. Convenience products are the common. An example is impulse products, those products that you buy like chocolates without thinking much. We also have emergency goods you only buy when you need them, like bandages. Impulse, this is a repetition of impulse. So bread, butter, margarine, those are things that you don't even call a meeting to buy. Then shopping goods, they are slightly more expensive. Now, these include like your television sets, your refrigerators, they fall under the category of shopping goods. Specialty goods, these ones require a certain level of innovation for you to buy. Sometimes you search for them in order to find them. They are special goods, sometimes exclusive. They are only distributed exclusively in certain shops. You also look at unsought goods, things like life insurance, things like coffins, things like tombstones. Those that you only buy when you really need and you search for them when you really need them. Like for instance, no one would buy a coffin in advance. So that's the challenge that you get when you are talking about unsought goods. So you need to be familiar with those. So in terms of the 4 Ps, these are cheap, these are relatively expensive. Specialty goods, they range from being very cheap to very expensive, but usually like works of art fall into this category. They can even be millions of dollars in some instances. Unsought goods, the price range. So be familiar with all the terminology that is covered here. Cars don't fall under specialty good, but special cars would probably fall. Those antique cars, the Rolls Royce, would fall under that category. Also familiarize yourself with the concept of the product mix. In terms of this concept, you should be able to define what the width is. There's a diagram, I think it's a figure, possibly 6.2. You will see there's a diagram that is there that indicates what's the product width, what's the product length, what the product depth, what the product mix. So when we talk about issue of consistency, your product line should be very consistent. Look at Coca-Cola, Coke Zero, Coke Light, Coke Life. All those products are related in one way or the other because it's a same product line. You need to look at those. They are the product line. So don't go to the exam without knowledge of these terms in that chapter. That concept that I emphasized earlier on, embryonic, the industry life cycle, you will notice if they mention 5 stages of Porter, we are referring to embryonic, growth, shakeout, maturity, and decline. The embryonic, we are talking about an industry that is still in its infancy. Now we are talking about industries that people are in innovation, they are starting to grow. So offhand, I'm trying to think of an industry that we can say it's in infancy, that is being introduced. The products are, maybe we can talk about the concept that have been introduced by Uber. They are not, they are introducing something that is new. It's still in its infancy. There are still very few players that are there. You can also look at the growth stage. Now companies start entering the industry. We look at, well, television has really matured, but there are some industries that we can find in growth. There are still few players that are supplying the products, so they can be categorized as industries that are in growth. Shakeout, there are so many players. The industry is almost reaching maturity, so they are pushing each other out of the industry because they can all survive. They cannot all survive together. So maturity, the industry has reached its peak. So when you are there, it's just mostly the big players that are fighting mostly in terms of pricing, doing sales promotion. So you need to be very familiar with industries that are in maturity. You have mobile communication are probably in maturity. Then decline reaches usually for marketing reasons. The product is no longer being favored by consumers. So the industry is generally forced into decline. Similarly, we also have the product life cycle, which is 4 stages: introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. I have discussed about this concept, but what you need to be familiar is the application of the relevant marketing mix. For instance, at introduction, there are few products, or a few products that is not well refined. The price usually can be premium, usually if it's an innovation or they are penetrating the market. Promotion is mostly to introduce the product. So you need to look at these concepts in that light. Introduction, growth. At growth, more players are coming in. There's competitive pricing, there's competitive advertising. So you look at that as you go on. The concept is almost the same as industry life cycle, but familiarize yourself, if you want to explain it very well, in terms of how these marketing mix variables are applied, and give examples. It's a debatable concept in terms of saying the product is in maturity or in decline, because if you don't have facts, it is very difficult to actually conclude that a certain product is in decline. So what they ask at this stage is simply to state the stages and explain briefly in terms of what it entails at each stage. So please familiarize yourself with that stage. We also look at, there are very few questions as far as business product is concerned. I'm sure you will notice of all the papers that I was going through, there was nothing that I saw as far as a business product is concerned. But nevertheless, please understand the areas that I have highlighted here in terms of the characteristics of business products. So be familiar with that. Don't go, learn it, understand the few components that are there. But it's one area that is not popular. But as far as multiple choice is concerned, I have seen a couple of questions on multiple choice in that regard. So don't go without reading those questions. Right. Then the concept of branding. Again, notice what is a brand. You need to be able to define the concept of a brand and the issue of what? Of brand equity. In simple, I can define brand equity as the difference between what a well-known brand would charge against an unknown brand. For instance, if we go to the cars, a Tata would never charge the same price as a VW. The reason is that VW has more equity in terms of equity is derived from awareness that is created, the image that the brand has created. So brands with awareness, with image, have higher equity than ordinary brands. You also need to be able to define what is a family brand, licensed brand, individual brand, and co-branding. You need to know those concepts as far as branding is concerned. So you need to be familiar with those terms. Especially these days, you have what are called in-house brands, the ones that are produced by the likes of Pick and Pay, Woolies, Checkers. They have their own brands that have started to compete with the traditional brands. We also look at benefits of branding to the consumers, to the retailers, and to the firm. Please know that in terms of the consumers, a brand to me, I define it as an assurance of value. That's the only reason why you would buy a brand like Coca-Cola, because you know what you expect. To the retailer, it makes it easier to pack on the shelves. For the firms, they also build the brand and they create equity, and it creates an advantage even when they extend brands. But look at those. We also look at issues like packaging. What's the relevance of packaging? It promotes, it protects, it enhances the product. So look at those. Another important concept that you would also notice is that of the new product development process. Please look at it and familiarize yourself in terms of each of the steps and their order. So if they ask you to go through the new product development process, be able to explain and state all the stages in order that they appear, and be able to explain what each stage represents. Naturally, although the book starts by talking about the product life cycle, it makes sense to me to discuss new product development first, but it doesn't matter. In the exam, they can ask you which comes first as a multiple choice question. So understand that one. This is chapter 6. Then chapter 7. Chapter 7, the one that relates to the place element of the marketing mix. There are again several aspects that you should be very familiar with in this chapter. Right? We look at place in the marketing mix. We look at what does a place do in the marketing mix? It is that function that gets the right product to the right customers at the right time. So you need to be very familiar with the role. So you are also looking at issues like intra-organizational arrangement in terms of within the organization, intermediary functions. The intermediaries relate to the wholesalers and retailers. Then the growth, retailer growth in the value chain, more and more retailers have become so big. So they are dictating what goes on as far as retailing is concerned. Then reverse logistics, this I'm sure I can refer it in terms of what happened to the Cougar, those cars that were catching fire. You will agree with me, it's very expensive to return a car to the manufacturer, especially to the manufacturer, because they have to foot the bills. So they try to make the product right the first time. So familiarize yourself with those concepts. You should also know the activities performed in the value chain: buying and selling, risk-taking, transportation, storage, rearrangement, creating possession and customer value, providing information to the consumer, and ensuring uniformity, quality standards. I like this concept of rearrangement, because if we did not have retailers or distributors, it means that you would probably have to go on your own to all the manufacturers. You can imagine if you want to eat a burger, you'd probably have to go and buy a bun somewhere at Albany. You have to go and buy polony somewhere from a farm somewhere, and the vegetables. So you find all these things in Pick and Pay. So they rearrange things that are required by the customer. And they also offer storage. We don't buy our annual supply of rice, our annual supply of those. So they perform very important function in the distribution channel. You also look at the key distribution decisions. You should be able to know them. they are aimed at making sure that they serve a particular target market. You also look at issues of the logistics. Logistics means the physical movement of products from point A to point B, including transportation. And you also look at the target markets. Who are you serving? So each depends on the market that you are serving. Also, we look at activities that are performed. I've discussed about them. Also, the types of consumers in distribution channel. They determine what type of distribution that you are going to use. Also, you look at types of businesses and distribution channels that are there. This hybrid or multiple channels of distribution refers to what companies are doing these days. They can use multiple channels. When you are saying multiple channels, online, use intermediaries, or you also have your own retail outlet. Those are the same. Vertical marketing channels, you are looking at where a company owns the entire system, which is called corporate. A good example is Butter Shoe Company. If you know, they are found in most shopping malls. They own the manufacturing, they also own the wholesale, and they own the retail. Then contractual, this is common with franchises, is they are based on a contractual agreement that is there between the franchisee and the franchisor. Then administered, this is usually based on the basis that one party is more powerful than the other. So familiarize yourself with all these concepts that you find in front of you. Also, franchising, be able to define what a franchise is and give practical examples. We also look at the concept of conflict. This material, you might not find it in your textbook. It's an addition that we have put in place from another book. But a conflict is when one player within the channel is impeding the other player from achieving their goals. So a conflict is usually caused by some of these factors that you see. Role incongruity. In other words, you are performing a role that is supposed to be performed by other member within the channel. Or perceptual difference. Some see that promotional material is something that they can use to give away when they are selling their products, but others want only their products to be sold with those promotional specials. So I've just added other areas to show you the different causes of what? Of our channel. So this I've explained, this is not in your book, it's just to give you an additional perspective in terms of what are the causes of channel conflict. Sometimes you don't get too many examples as far as channel conflict is concerned because most of the conflicts that occur are actually hidden. Companies don't want to reveal their conflicts in the public domain. That's why you don't get to see most of the conflicts being discussed even in books. So they are rare. You also need to know the different types of power: coercive power, reward power, legitimate power, expert power. Please know those. It's also a question that is possible in the exam. I think those ones are clear in terms of explanation. You also need to look at the characteristics that influence distribution channel, customer characteristics, product characteristics. It's clearly explained in the textbook, and also your learner guide gives you very good examples as far as that area is concerned. So familiarize yourself with the influences in distribution. Another area that you are also supposed to be familiar with is the types of wholesalers and retailers. Remember, these days, in reality, it has become difficult to distinguish. Traditionally, a macro and game were traditional retailers, wholesalers rather. They would sell only to small to retailers. But because of the changes that have occurred, there is a blurring between who is traditionally a retailer and who is a wholesaler, as all are now selling directly to the final consumer. And also, you notice retailers have also bypassed wholesalers and they are buying directly from the manufacturers. Other issues I've discussed about this, the growing power of retailers, they are bigger. Pick and Pay is so big that it actually dictates what it wants from most of the manufacturer. So they are developing also their own labels, which I call the private labels. The increasing use of technology, you will agree with me at the 2 points, there is so much. They use data scanners. They have changed and revolutionized the way retailing is done. I'm sure right now you can even scan those, I don't know what to call the codes. If you go to Kawai on your phone, you have that code you can actually scan. Those are some of the technologies that are there. So developing of own brands, be familiar with those as well. So that's chapter 7. Pricing, also quite detailed as far as discussion is concerned, because it's one of those important chapters that you are supposed to be familiar with. Can we get the slides? You can get the presentation, but should you request, I don't mind giving the slides to you. If you want the slides in the form that I'm presenting them, I'm sure Genevieve can organize them for you. But what I know for a fact that you'll get on eLearn is the presentation that we are doing right now. You will be able to get it after almost 5 days. Then pricing. Pricing, what you need to be familiar with is all the steps that are followed when you want to determine price, but not necessarily to know the steps in order, but what happens at each of the stages. If you noticed, we're discussing about some of these questions were coming out where they ask you to define some of the different pricing strategies. So in highlighting that, I've actually looked at some key areas. You need to know what happens at each stage and some of the terms that are there thereof. You notice from the papers that we discussed, you were noticing some of the popular questions. So in doing that, I also highlighted 2 of the critical. This is step 1. You need to be able to define the internal factors that the pricing constraints. In terms of internal factors, you need to know what is involved there. You also need to look at external factors. So they can ask you to define the internal factors or the external factors, the pricing constraints. So be familiar with those. So that's one area of pricing. I skipped some of the chapters. Now I went to highlight some of the other important areas in terms of pricing. These we also call them pricing strategies. But how they ask the questions, they clearly indicate what is customer value methods, or they can clearly say in five lines or so, or for 5 marks, explain what demand backward pricing is, or cost plus pricing, experience effect, loss leader pricing. So you need to be familiar with these areas as far as pricing is concerned, because they are core, because these are typical 5 marks. Again, you noticed we saw these more often than others. So I urge you to really understand the pricing strategies in terms of how they are applied, in terms of just knowledge of defining and when they are used. It's very important. So those are the areas that I've highlighted on price, because those are the common. But I'm not saying don't go through all the other areas in that pricing. Each stage, you need to be able to define those core concepts that are covered in that area. Right? Promotion, which is one of the most visible areas as far as the marketing mix are concerned. Basically, the role of any promotion is to inform, to persuade, and to remind. You need to know that offhand. What are the key roles of promotion? I highlighted some of Capitec is one of my favorite companies. It's rare for me to finish a presentation without talking about Capitec, because it's one of the most exciting companies at the moment in terms of how they did their promotion. You can see from their adverts that most of their adverts were to inform initially in 2008. Right now, check some of their adverts. It's one company where you can learn marketing easily. Their share price is doing very well. So I'm not just a fanatic of marketing, but I studied because they've done something that is phenomenal. You can also check around. You'll see that Capitec is there, one of the best companies at the moment in South Africa. You need to be familiar with the integrated marketing communication process, particularly the elements of the IMC. These are the elements of the IMC: advertising, personal selling, sales promotion, direct marketing, public relations, and publicity. So look at that model, but more important, understand the elements of the marketing mix variables. You also need to know, because advertising is the most prominent element of advertising. Here, This is the steps that you follow when you are advertising. But in that, I deliberately added, here there's a 4th step that you need to know in terms of selecting the media. Please also know that. Also know the different messages approach: fear-inducing, slice of life, fantasy, testimonial, slogans and jingles, rational approach, emotional appeal, and humorous approach. Please be familiar with this one. Also, under here, there are also some strategies that you need to know in terms of flighting, pulsing. You need to know those. They were, I think, in the October paper. Please know them. They come from that stage. So be familiar with these concepts that I'm introducing because they are important. Also, look at after the campaign in terms of how do you measure success of the campaign. Be familiar with what is called aided recall, unaided recall, aptitude test, inquiry test, and sales tests. Know those concepts because they are important. But more important, I emphasize, just be familiar with some of these concepts when creating the message, and also be familiar with this part of selecting the media. It's a very important part as far as advertising is concerned. Know the entire process, but more emphasis on the areas that I have highlighted. Here, I just explained in detail the elements that are under each element. Under direct marketing, you have telemarketing, direct mail, catalogs, direct action response, internet commerce, and in-home. Again, make an effort to understand those. Don't go to the exam without knowledge of those. We also look at personal selling. More important, this is quite common in business-to-business setting, but we also use it, especially as it requires you to do a face-to-face for things like insurance, because you require that, or extended problem-solving products. These are high-value items. You require a salesperson. And be familiar with the selling process, at least the steps, and be able to briefly describe them. Notice, exam can come from any part, but what I'm doing here is to guide you through areas that are common, that you should not go to the exam without thorough knowledge. Also, sales promotion, it's targeted at your salespeople, your distributors, and the consumers. So to consumers, you do free samples, contests, price incentives. You also look at free products like trade shows, calendars, and all those. Those are the popular areas that you need to look at. We also look at public relations, a very important area. Last week, you know, those of you who follow the media, you saw what happened to United Airlines. It was very damaging, but now it becomes worse because of the internet, because information spreads so fast. So public relations is very important in terms of keeping the image of the company in the media. So be also alert in terms of that. So those are the areas that we deal with, particularly in that chapter. You are supposed to be familiar with those. Then services are very important in terms of the additional marketing mix. Someone says a water break. Unfortunately, you can drink there, you are not doing anything. Maybe for me. Right. Thank you very much for reminding me to take water. Right. Also, services are what I have noticed from the service area. There have been lots of questions from this chapter. So read it through, understand it. The characteristics that distinguish a product from a physical product, please know them. Also, the spectrum between the service spectrum between goods and services. There is a straight line in your book where it talks about a pure service and a physical good. Be familiar with that. But more important in this chapter, demand side, supply side, what is a service? It's anything intangible. What they do, there's an area that I want to highlight. That is very important as far as service is concerned. Right, that service triangle. You noticed there are questions that are asked on the service triangle in terms of external, internal, and interactive marketing. Be familiar with that. Although I feel they should give 6 marks, but it's always 3 marks. But end those 3 marks. There's a triangle which shows employees, company, and the client. So external, internal, and interactive. I've discussed that, so you should be familiar, but know that one. And we also look at services mix. Now, with the services mix, we also include the core element of the 4 Ps in the service. So I urge you to familiarize yourself with all the 4 Ps as far as they are concerned, as far as services are concerned. But more important in this chapter, I'm more interested in the element of promotion, because that's where we have seen questions, particularly this one, services marketing mix, sales promotion. You notice there is sampling, you should be able to give an example. Coupons, you should be able to give an example. In terms of all those, put a star on this element, but know all the elements of the marketing mix. Promotion is what I emphasize that you should know, at least in more detail, but also in this chapter, know the other elements of the marketing mix, especially, I'm just going to skip place, you should know that. Price, you should also be familiar with that. But more important is the physical evidence, the processes, and people. Because the 4 Ps, we have looked at them earlier on, but now they are only reflect. This is chapter 10. Chapter 10 decides you need to be able to look at service scape. If you look at those questions that I gave you earlier on, they were asking about that. When you talk about the service scape, we are talking about exterior design, how the building looks like from outside, the interior design, how it looks like inside, the ambience, the feel that you get when you are in that building is very important. And other elements include business cards, stationery. I'm sure by just looking at the website, you can be able to tell what kind of a company you are looking at. So don't ignore the websites because they tell you the physical things about the company. We also look at people. These are the ones that make things happen. And they can actually create a difference. If you invest a lot in your people, you can actually get the best of products because they are the ones that deal directly with customers. So what I urge you is to understand the role that is played by people in an organization. At least what you need to craft is 6 marks. Look mainly at employees, but in that, you also need to look at the expert of the customer in terms of there are those that are looking at the ideal service, the desired service. So understand those because customers also participate in the service. How the service becomes is also dependent on the customer. So it's equally very important that you work with the customer and also know as an advice to students or as customers, don't be rough to those people who are dealing with because they are also human. Because you are part and element of getting the best service. If the person serving you is not happy with you, they don't give you the best product, even though they are employed by a company. So likewise, because you take part in the service, be very careful in terms of how you deal, especially in the restaurants. Be very friendly. You have everything done. You actually get the desired service. Then integrated marketing, an important chapter. In other words, what it does, it encompasses all the things that we have discussed in this chapter, in the whole book. So it summarizes, it sums up. In fact, when you look at it, it goes back to chapter 1 and discusses about the marketing concept. It also introduces the effects on the environment, and they discuss the marketing mix, and they also discuss even the additional 3 Ps. But there are questions that are new that you get, like for instance, the characteristics of an organization following the marketing concepts. You only get this question in this chapter. So be aware because it is asked before: customer focus, a team approach, competitor orientation, and social responsibility. It's nothing new as it has been discussed earlier on in chapter 1. But if you want to get the best answer, you actually get it from chapter 11. Then this question, common, the key drivers of environmental change. Be familiar with it. Sometimes it's 4 marks, sometimes it's 8 marks. So depending on the number of marks, in my view, just explain for 8 marks to get 2 marks, but don't go beyond 3 lines to explain concept. the products that I'm using in front of me are all global products, including the water that I have. It's also a global product. Changing structures of industry. You can agree with me, Kodak is now dead. There is digital technology. Uber is giving problems to the taxis in South Africa. Then information revolution, the sky is the limit as far as information that you can get. So you are seeing all these, and customer expectations are rising. I noticed as I was doing this presentation, some of you are saying we want the presentation. Those are customer expectations and they are rising. So why not? Because information can be provided via online. Why should we do that? So we'll possibly also do that. We also look at MIS. Again, you find this in chapter 4, but it's quite straightforward in terms of the role of MIS. So you need to be familiar with what is the MIS, what is its role. The question is very clear for 4 marks. And also, we look at those additional 4 Ps. They are also asking, I have put a number of questions, and I deliberately not discussed these because they are also discussed in the previous chapters. So, but in terms of the book, you will notice that on 279, there's a summary. 280, there's a summary. 281, in that page, there's a summary. But these questions relate to the additional marketing mix. So they are saying, discuss the importance of physical evidence. Discuss the importance of people. This is also the reputation. Discuss the 2 types of physical evidence. The 2 types of physical evidence, they are actually given here as beta. What I want you to do, you read 284 to 285. These are the 2 types, essential evidence and peripheral evidence. This is where you see the answer. Essential evidence and peripheral evidence. So you get the answer. You can read that on page 284 for details. Then also ethics. Ethics are in all areas, but you need to be able to define what ethics are in terms of products, product quality, pricing, all those elements, as it is important. You also need to look at ethics in terms of packaging, in terms of labeling. That is very common. Now, earlier on when we were discussing multiple choice, I deliberately took you to look at issues like ambiguity, concealment of facts, and exaggeration. I'm sure by now you are familiar. It's on page 287 to 288. Be familiar with that because the question has been asked before for 8 marks. So you need to be able to describe those in brief, at least enough to get 8 marks. Then the last but not least is the chapter on internet marketing. I'm quite old. Those of you who are younger have grown up with the internet. You probably know this chapter better than me because it relates to the internet. So things to do with the internet are for the young generation. That's a joke. Just a joke. I was born when computers were formed, so I've grown up with computers. So I'm quite familiar with the internet. But I only highlight areas. The definition of the internet, you need to be, it's a wide network of interconnected computers. So no one really owns the internet. But you can see some of the advantages: ease of use, information available to everyone. It facilitates the conduction of various business activities. Like what we are doing right now, we are taking advantage of the benefits of the internet. So everyone can watch from any point, from wherever they are. But of course, there are challenges here and there as far as the network is concerned. But we can certainly see the benefits of the internet. We also look at advances in the internet. We can disseminate information easily. We've got websites, we've got magazines. So you need to be able to do that. But there are key questions that I will just highlight that you are supposed to know. Auto tools, auto responders, those are discussion forums. But there are questions, marketing advances on the internet, blogs, social media. You need to be familiar with such terms. But as far as questions are concerned, there is one in terms of how does the internet help on the marketing mix. So know the benefits of the internet as far as the marketing mix is concerned. Also, in terms of that question, we saw it earlier on in terms of how do you conduct research on the internet. These are the ways. You can do desk research, You can conduct surveys and also send out questionnaires on the internet. There is a question that relates to those two elements that are here on this same page. So familiarize yourself with those. Also, the benefits of the internet are offer 24-hour support for customers. So also 24/7, 365. In other words, the internet is always open anytime. Unlike we from here and going to sleep, but the internet will still be open. You can still be able to use facilities. CRM, customer relations management, it actually improves communication. Right now, you can send an email tomorrow to request for some of the PowerPoints. You will probably get them because they will be available. So you can request, I'm sure they can be organized for you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was my last presentation. I don't know if there are any of you who would like to ask questions. I normally put a person with a question mark towards the end. Anyone who would like to ask questions so that I can attend to the questions? Portia, you are welcome. Arnold, did you see the little snake on the board behind you? I didn't. There are too many snakes behind me. You are welcome, Connie. Thank you very much, Deb. You are welcome. Thank you. You are welcome. Just make a request. I'm sure they can be able to send you the PowerPoints in PDF format. You are welcome. You are welcome, guys. Unfortunately, this is the last online on marketing one. Yes, you are supposed to know the different marketing mix definitions. Yeah, Genevieve is also in attendance, so she's responding to some of the questions that you are asking. There is lots of time, Rian, to study this. In fact, you can read that book in 4 days. No, the examples can be based on any environment. They don't have to be, they have to be based on your own environment to show your own understanding, not necessarily South African. Remember, IMM is a global brand. Yes, you can focus on them. The last 2 chapters are very important. Lots of questions come from that chapter. You need to read them and understand them. Morapel, they are very important. I also work to me. I also work. When I was doing the IMM program, I was also working. I actually had 2 jobs. Unfortunately, you can't get the memorandum. I was trying to give you the memorandum during this presentation. Yeah, you see, Deb, I'm actually working right now. Thank you very much. Well, Sheldon is asking a question is that, no, these are just general guidelines in terms of how you are supposed to approach the question. Overall, you are still supposed to go back to your learning outcomes in order to understand everything that you are expected to know in order to prepare for the exam. I do not know what is in the exam. I was just give you guidelines in terms of what you should know before you go and write an examination. Yes, on an average, on a 2-mark question, at least 4 lines. But you can do it in 3. There is a clear distinction between MIS and marketing research, unless you are saying MIS and MDSS. But with marketing research, just check your book, you will see there's a clear distinction between MIS and market research, because market research is the overall process of collecting information. Then the MIS collect that information, even the information that comes from market research is also collected within an MIS. That's part of that information. If you go to chapter 11, I think you will see a very good diagram that distinguishes, it shows market research also supplying information to the MIS. You can, Ramokete, you can actually, a group forum, that's another way. I'm sure Genevieve is going to give you an email address just now. Yeah, that's the email address. Yes, I wish you all the best. Go get distinctions. I can see Dep is likely to get a distinction. All the best. Be blessed, guys, as you write your examination. I wish you all the best. Only 1 hour a day is good enough. 1 hour a day studying is good enough. Between now and then, 1 hour a day is good enough for you to study. 6th of May. No, this is the last time that you are seeing me. Don't, God is there in your life already. Don't worry. You don't do any quoting in the exam. Remember, it's not an open book. You don't go with the textbook in the exam. Anything, if you can memorize anything, you don't even do any referencing in the exam. So you can use your own examples in the exam. Even if you use Capitec, it doesn't matter. The examples are not, even if you use the examples that are in your learner guide, it's still acceptable. Examples, as long as you can remember them in the exam. No, use Capitec examples as much as you want. It's actually allowed for you to do that. There is no restriction as far as the exam is concerned. You can use any example to show your own understanding. It's the exam, not the assignment. Okay. Grammar, you might be punished, but it's not as strict as in communication. So I urge you to write the best English. Genevieve has promised the recording in the next plus or minus 3 days. You are welcome to me. Good night to you guys. Thank you very much. Thank you. No, you won't be penalized if you, anything in the exam that you write, there's no referencing, there's no one who will be caught for plagiarism. So there's no referencing in the exam. What you write, you can write anything. Good night to you all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.